Welcome back to the Louder Now podcast. I'm your host, Jared Deal. Hey everyone, you've probably heard this before, or if you're new here, you haven't. This podcast is about mental health and spirituality and faith and everything that goes with both of those subjects, which I know they're very big subjects. I'm ambitious and like to tackle those things. The podcast has solo episodes and also conversations with various people sharing their experiences and their stories. So today is a really fun episode. This is the first time I've ever talked to doctors, as in their profession. They're actually doctors. And we had a long, great conversation and just touched on a lot of different things. Hearing their personal stories of struggle, talking about trauma, talking about forgiveness, talk about psychedelics a little bit. And man, it was so fun. So here is episode 121 with doctors Tim and May. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for being on the podcast today. I've done a lot of interview conversations. I like to not say interviews, but I've never had two people on at the same time. I don't think so. And also, you guys are doctors, and that's not the only thing you do. You guys also have a podcast. So, welcome to my podcast. And I started this podcast because, as I shared you guys a story before we started recording, had a bipolar diagnosis for like 15 years. And I've also just been a Jesus follower pretty much since I was a little kid. And so kind of the podcast is just talking to people about sort of both subjects. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your guys' background and like your own story with your maybe mental health challenges, or even also how you decided to help people by becoming doctors, which is awesome.
Well, here we go. I guess I'll start. But I don't, for me, the story of becoming a doctor is dates way back to when I was like 10 years old and really had nothing to do with anything earth shattering other than I was this curious kid that liked science and liked to do experiments in our basement and blow things up. And I was the girl that got the chemistry set for Christmas and
Baking soda, volcano.
yeah, and food coloring and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
girls can like science and blow stuff up, generically blow things, small blow ups, but in basements. And then it was kind of now little May's going to be the doctor, and that was it. It was like proud parents. No one had gone to university. It was the die was cast. So there was a lot of baggage though that did go with that, leading to a lot of mental health challenges afterwards. And so my story basically then starts with I grew up in a really middle class average home, oldest kid, and then pretty normal upbringing until fourth grade. And from fourth through sixth grade, for at least 3 years that I really can would say remember well, I was sexually abused by a teacher. And it was a bunch of us girls, and it didn't get pieced together until like like I said, sixth grade, when one of my friends at the time, her dad was the superintendent of the school that lived across the street, and I said something to her, and she was a few years older and had the wherewithal to go, someone else said that. And basically my um my parents and her dad had a meeting in the living room to discuss it, and it got swept under the rug, so to speak, that I just told them vaguely my story. This teacher then was put on early retirement. I grew up in a small town of 10, well, it was a 10,000 people sized town. So, you would see this person, which, and back in those days, this was like the late 70s at this time, there was no, it was just things got pushed aside and you just moved on. And so there's no counseling or mental health. And I think as my parents, even because my father was gone a lot just because of his work, he was gone for 7, 8 months of the year. He was a pilot, he'd be gone. Um, and my mother was just doing the best she could. And unbeknownst to me, had gone through a similar thing, only it was a cousin that abused her. And it was dealt with by just moving on, sort of fixing the problem by physically removing her from that person and then never dealing with it. And I didn't know that until years later, my grandmother passed and all this stuff had come up. So that really was set the tone for what was about to happen in my life, because then moving on, just all kinds of things happened where I was afraid of men. I had a close relationship with my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who was like a father figure, but I was scared of boys and dating was not a thing. And, even some um, attraction to females that were really close kind of entered my mind, and that curiosity, I sort of acted on it vaguely in junior high. But as time went on and I, then thought, what am I going to do with my life? Um, I got a lot of anxiety, and by high school, I had full on eating disorder, and I became anorexic because now I was going to be supposed to be this doctor and all these expectations. I had all this other stuff that didn't get dealt with. And I was very depressed in high school. The fact that I excelled and did as well as I did is amazing. I tried to, I would say I almost attempted an overdose on medications that was my mother's headache medications. And then she kind of found me in the bathroom, and still nothing really, no attempt at any help. It was just kind of like, oh, are you okay? So this is the beginning of my um, struggle with depression in high school, and to control everything with this eating disorder. And so off to college I went. Um, it was a horrible time. I hated it. Uh, I then started to get bulimia on top of the anorexia, and I was like a top-notch student in high school, and then moved from a town of 10,000 to like a big city, and so I become a small fish now in this big pond, struggling to even know who I was. And I started having a lot of bad relationships with um, boyfriends, and looked for sort of love in a lot of wrong places, had a lot of sexual relationships that were just, one night stands and things like that. And then, of course, in Canada, where we grew up, the drinking age, of course, is 18. So you throw that in there, and
Oh, okay.
down where they don't
I
really,
don't think I knew that, or I
yeah,
didn't know that. Okay.
they, they don't really police it very, very much. Down,
18,
like
geez.
half of the people when at graduation are legal age of drinking. So,
half or more.
Yeah,
Because most people don't graduate when they're 17.
I graduated.
How many
at 17.
fatalities did you have during graduation when you were in high school?
We had about 2 every year. We had 2 in our class.
Oh, because of alcohol or
Mhm.
alcohol related?
Yep. So the grad parties are full of alcohol. The parents provide it. They kind of lock you in. I mean, it's just nuts. And that was a long time ago, the 80s. But so
Yeah.
so alcohol is just the norm. And um, at this point, then there's other experimental things. I'd use some marijuana and some other experimental drugs, some psychedelics. So as you can imagine, and I'm still trying to get through pre-med. I got into medical school when I was 19, and
Wow.
then the pressure comes on even more. And that's when things started to unravel, because as you can imagine, I'm depressed, and the bulimia is crazy out of control. The relationships, I'm just, going from one weekend to the next looking for someone to love me. And I hit rock bottom. My grades were getting bad in school. I had an actual athletic injury playing girls football. It was a co-ed college thing, and tore my ACL. And that was enough it was in the fall of the one year where we had all these major exams at Christmas, and it was enough to take me out of school long enough, and to the point where I I was like, I think I should just drop out because I don't know that I really belong in med school, want to be here. I'm probably going to fail out, and I've got this orthopedic injury to deal with. So I dropped out of med school. And
Well, you didn't drop out of med school. You just went back a year.
Well, I technically dropped out, not knowing if I would come back. No, I exited the program, but they said, if you want to come back, the door's open.
Oh, okay.
That's how it was.
Is that where you guys met? Oh, I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah. So meanwhile, I had also started to become friends with people in my med school class that were Christians and really wonderful girls.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We had a study group together, and it was just by happenstance. Mostly it was a study group, but then, we'd be studying, we'd start talking about other things, and I'm asking questions about spirituality and God. And our family, my family, grew up in it would be equivalent to the United Methodist Church. So we would go for sure on major holidays, and sometimes throughout the year. For a while, I played the piano and the organ at church, and it was like something to get paid. I really hated going. It seemed like a really boring history class. And I remember going to Sunday school at times, but for mostly it was just a ritualistic thing. My grandparents had some faith, but it was not an important. It was just kind of something everybody did on holidays and sometimes on weekends. So at this point,
but it was Canada, so they did it super hungover.
At this point, having my friends in med school, I'm asking all these questions about God and spirituality, and really wrestling with my demons that I still had kept a secret. And really, at this point, nobody knew. So, fast forward to this knee injury, and figuring out what I'm doing with my life. And I thought, man, I've worked so hard. Who am I? Like, I really didn't know who I was other than being a doctor from the time I was like 10 years old. That's all I supposedly ever worked for. And I didn't know who else I was other than that. So I went back and got back into med school and dropped back into what would be Tim's class behind me. And that's where we met. But at the same time, connected again with my friends that were going to church. And the other thing that happened the same year, and that year that I was off, was a friend sort of found me out. She also suffered from bulimia, and she could tell and knew all the telltale signs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She confronted me. So what happened then was I came kind of clean, and I had one of those moments where I literally was, excuse me, get a drink.
No problem.
Throat's dry and I just getting over a cold. I had a moment where I was literally on my knees in the bathroom and really praying to God and saying, God, if you're real, then I need you now at the floor of this porcelain bowl, because I can't do this anymore. So, yeah, I mean, sorry, it's kind of an emotional thing because I don't talk about it in this depth a lot. But so at that point, my friend connected me with a family doctor who was really schooled and knew a lot about bulimia, because this doctor had it herself. And I got some really good counseling, and I started in a intense program in the summer that year that I was off med school, and did a one-on-one therapy session with people with eating disorders, which was amazing. It was like a day program, and I went all the time. And that was the beginning for me of figuring out all about my eating disorder and getting that sort of under control. But it wasn't cured for a while. So I'm going to fast forward to, that I get into med school with Tim. I still connect with these girls. And at the same time, I start going to church. And one day I just felt this really strong call from the Lord, and there was an altar call, and I could tell I was being pulled. It was like a physical sense that I've never experienced, and unless you've had it, it's hard to explain. But God was pulling me by an electric current down to the front of the altar of that church, and I'm like, yeah, I need God. I'm ready to accept Jesus into my heart because I'm nothing without him, and I can't control my life. I can't cure my life.
Wow.
And if there's any hope, it's him. I'm putting it all on the line. And so I went forward and I got prayed over. I met some really cool people and got part of a little small group. And at the same time, Tim and I are becoming friends in med school. And I kind of share with him a little bit what's going on. And I got baptized in his family's church. And that's how I got saved.
Wow.
Now,
Well,
all the other
yes,
stuff.
you met me, but you were also hunting me like a pinpoint elk. You got to fill in the gaps.
Oh, sorry about all this coffee.
Oh, okay. She was hunting you. This is turned into a relationship podcast.
Yeah. So the other thing
It
is
was
that
actually
we were
it's
becoming-
actually
Tim and I-
bizarre. Like you look at us now and you're like, how did that mush head get
Tim and I
her?
were
You know, but
becoming friends at the same time. We sat together in class. So
Yeah.
we would have some really great talks. He was a very strong Christian and raised in a much different home, which he'll share. And so from my other friends from the class ahead of me, as well as Tim, I was really getting fed spiritually and getting a lot of questions answered. And once I started going to church with him at his family's church and decided to get truly baptized again, it all started to the wheels started to spin and things went into place. But fast forward, we get married 2 years later. I still suffered a lot with the bulimia through internship and residency year. And when we were first married, things were getting a little bit better, but it took a while. And I did start on some medication at that point. So now I was like 26 and internship was hard. I still really did not like at this point, I'm like, I still don't know that I want to do medicine. I hate it, but what are my options? I mean, I can't really drop out and go work at Macy's because that's all I'm trained to do. Go sell cosmetics. I felt highly educated with no skills to do anything else. Right. I mean, it's kind of how it is. So I thought I might as well stick this out to the end. But the first year was really difficult of our marriage because we're both interns. We're working different schedules. And my sister, who is 7 years younger than me, had to move in with us thanks to my parents' request. And she was an undiagnosed bipolar person that really had issues. And now you throw that in with a newly married couple who were trying to figure things out and we barely see each other. It was a rough year. So I had a lot of depression and I did start on some Prozac. And that helped mostly the eating disorder part of things, honestly.
Really? Is that
And
the early years of Prozac?
yeah,
Right?
it was
Wasn't that
back
the early 90s?
that would have been in 92, 93
93.
that I started on. And it was mostly for the eating disorder. I'm like, I'll give this a go. I'm feeling it's still really depressed, apathetic. And, I've now got this new found spiritual faith that's really helping, but I still have these tendencies, and it was supposed to actually help with the cravings. You're right, of the and the binging, and it did.
Wow, I never knew that would kind of
Yeah.
be a way that it could be.
Well, honestly, it probably works better for those kind of things when you start to look back, because now we've had 30 years of Prozac than anything.
Right.
Like SSRIs. I mean, we've both been on them at various times, and I'm no longer a believer. I've written hundreds and thousands of prescriptions for it, and it's just
we'll get to that.
when you get to the cumulative data, it's kind of like.
So I did start on it because it was like,
Interesting.
okay, this is new. But the one, and Tim will remember exactly, maybe better than I do, when this was the thing that really cured me for my bulimia was, and this is around that time. I think it really was 94 when we went back home. We finished our residency. We went back home. We were working where we went to med school for the summer before we moved to the US here. And we were doing urgent care rotation. Not rotation, but work for 4
They were
months.
actually getting paid, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Love that part.
It was at that point, where we talked a lot about what had happened to me as a kid with the abuse and the sexual abuse. And he's like, have you really ever forgiven that guy? You know, in
Wow.
your heart, do you think you've forgiven him? And it was, I would have to say for me, I thought about it and we prayed a lot about it. And it was almost like, let's say, a demon possession thing. It was just this weird spiritual thing inside of me that I had to fully get rid of. And it felt like a physical thing I had to pull out of my body. But I truly was able to forgive that man for what he did as a human and say, I truly forgive you. God loves you. You're broken. You did this to us kids because you're broken and wasn't your fault. And that was it. That was the cure. And after that, never had another bulimic thought. I never had another anorexic sort of tendency throughout my life.
Wow. Wow.
And I felt this massive relief. Now, the emotional sort of depression, anxiety stuff would kind of come and go throughout my life. And I struggled with postpartum depression and some other things throughout the way. But
Right.
anorexia, bulimia, that whole thing of control, gone. And so I've counseled patients and talked to people that, and I say, you know, I think for a lot of people, eating disorders are a lifelong thing. I mean, you can't escape food. And so the struggle is very difficult, just like overeating, you know, because we need it to survive, yet you're faced with this all the time. And I think it's kind of like alcoholism in a way. I mean, for alcoholists, you know, you need to quit completely or you go down that, but eating disorder is much different. And I think a lot of people really struggle to ever be cured of that. But for me, I know in my heart of hearts, like I've never,
because you know where it came from,
yeah,
though.
I've
See
never
that, but that's
slipped back down in that slippery slope of wanting that control.
right, and that's it. You know, and that's the thing. It's like, if you know, to put it into a spiritual context, which I think is the only one that really matters. You know, the demonic side of it, or the oppression, or the whatever, the attack was because you were violated. And so it's exactly, the power is exactly the same thing as what Christ has done for us on the cross, which is the power is in the forgiveness. It's and we forget that. And we live in a society now where, you know, forgiveness is like the worst thing you could do. You know, why are we so unbelievably divided? Why does everyone get offended by absolutely everything? You're looking for these bitter roots of offense in absolutely every, you know, post, and every, you know, and you know, and the social media companies try to make you offended so that you stay more engaged. Like anything, they don't care what increases engagement, whether it's a happy engagement or a pissed off engagement. They just want you engaged.
Right.
And it's fascinating when you see these feeds. Like I finally started looking at them and going, they're trying to make me engage because they're trying to make me angry. So I just can ignore it because I don't know this person. It could be a bot. And the power of forgiveness in our lives is just staggering.
Yeah.
And totally forgotten. It's like somehow you got to win. Like, no, eventually you got to forgive. That's how you win.
Yeah. And with things, you know, even in my life, I mean, and we all say more minor things where, you know, someone has wronged you or things have happened, you know, it really, holding that grudge and that anger and that hate in you, it was really only affecting you, not the other person. And it's being able to like let that go and forgive that situation. Doesn't mean forget it or, you know, go down that path again, but it really does control you in ways that are so much more powerful than I think a lot of people realize. And it's so freeing to be able to forgive and let it go and move on and go, you know, I'm not gonna let this have power over me, because it does in some way. So
but I think it's super important to understand, and I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion both inside and outside of the church what forgiveness is. You know, it's not trusting somebody. It's, you know, the best definition I ever heard of forgiveness, and again, it's incomplete, but it really is a helpful framework. It was a guy that actually came and spoke at our church back in the mid 80s, and his daughter was raped and murdered by some psychopath. And him and his wife really felt like they were being called to go forgive this guy. So they actually went to the, jail and talked to him and forgave him. And I have no idea what actually, if he accepted it, if it made any difference to him. I don't think it did. I think he kind of just rejected them. But really what they came up with, they had this forgiveness ministry, and people were like super upset with him. Like even at church, it's like, why would you talk to him? Blah, blah, blah. And they said, no, here's the deal. It's not that this guy shouldn't be punished by the state. It's not that he shouldn't go to court. It's like all of those things are still true. But the difference is I don't punish him because I'm not the one that decides his punishment. I'm not God. I'm not the magistrate. I'm not the state. And really what they came down to was the definition is forgiveness is relinquishing the desire to punish. And that's, and when you think of that, it's super powerful, because when you are the punisher, as much as we want to put on our punisher, shirt with the skull on there and go kick someone's ass that offended us.
Yeah.
You're putting when you're putting yourself in the position of God by being the punisher. That's really the key. And none of us is God. And so none of us can actually be part of, be on that throne. And so forgiveness doesn't mean the person isn't going to be punished. They're just not going to be punished by me, which means they're not going to own my soul. Right. And that's the key. Like you either get to be it's so horrible, because some of the things that happen to people, it's unfathomable to think of how they could give it up. But it's the only way to freedom. I mean, sorry, it's the only way there is. And it's amazing how powerful it is when you realize you're not God. I don't need to punish them, and you give them back, and whatever happens to them is up to God. Right. And it's amazingly like, we went through some different traumas with various work things and contract issues and whatever. And literally I would wake up in the middle of the night so pissed off at some of the people that I had felt had wronged us, that I was waking up dreaming that I drove over them with my Escalade and backed over them. And I'm like, I don't think that's forgiveness. I think that's actually desiring to punish rather than relinquishing. And
wow, you drive an Escalade? Nice.
Well, it's a 2008. It's a little beat. It's not a new one.
No, I love what you're saying, and thank you, May, for sharing your story too. Just like, I've never listened to your podcast, so maybe it's on your podcast somewhere. But I love having these conversations where there's just kind of this like, yeah, it's not easy to, even stuff that like maybe you feel like you relive some of it by telling it, but yeah, it's like I've been in church my whole life, and it's like there's knowing what's true, which that can be a certain category of people, right? Like the scripture that's like, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, right? It's like in the prophets or something. But I think most of us know after a while, right? I mean, maybe you can go to a certain community where it's like the messages are kind of superficial or like prosperity gospel-ish. So maybe you don't know that forgiveness is kind of like the main message, right? Like love, grace, mercy, forgiveness. That's what Jesus came to do and show. But then there's our personal experience with the thing that we know is true. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. And then it's like, if you don't deal with it. So do you guys find that in your practice, even though it's complex, like our bodies, do you think that that's a lot of what's going on with people, like trauma? It's kind of undealt with. It's like they need to forgive, and then you're like, well, you also need to eat good and exercise too. But what about this internal? And like, maybe we point people to like do therapy, but then it's like, how do you walk someone through what you guys just said, which is awesome, right?
Well, it takes. Okay, the best example I can give is, I think, something that most people will understand, which is I had a patient come in and she was on I think over 140 milligrams of methadone a day. So to give you kind of a perspective, the standard, I mean, most people with cancer would take maybe 10 milligrams twice a day. So she was on massive doses of methadone, which is a very long acting opioid, which has some horrendous side effect issues because people take tons of it, they don't get very high, and then they get a little high and they take a little bit more to push the high like they would with a shorter acting opiate, and then they wake up dead. So I looked at her and I said, here's the deal. We'll get you off this because it's absolutely 100% destroying your life. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. It's going to be unbelievably brutal. Your chronic pain that you've had is going to come back way worse than it's ever been. And I'll see you every single week, and it might take a year. And when you're done, it'll be 100% worth it. And so I think going into it, you have to be really honest. Like our podcast is BS free MD, and I think I've been BS free, at least in medicine, my entire life. And you don't help people by telling them something that they want to hear or something that's not true. And this woman was great. It was like refreshing for her. She's like, okay, we'll just go with the program. And it took a super long time. And she had chronic pain for the rest of her life. But she was way more functional and felt way better. And so it's the same thing. It's like you might go through a therapeutic relationship with somebody where it's trauma, which means the end of trauma and the end of you traumatizing yourself from that trauma from someone else's forgiveness. But there's no way in the world you're going to see somebody for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour and say, okay, well, here's your goal. Your goal is to forgive the person that raped you. That's not going to work. Now, you as the therapist or the physician might know that that's the goal, but you have to kind of slowly wean them off. Like it's like, it's like a drug.
Right.
And you're like, okay, what about this? What about the, and then and there's some people in the recovery world that really believe it's all trauma. I mean, I think it would be naive to say that all mental illness is trauma-based. I think that that's silly. I think probably way more of it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think a tremendous,
no.
I think a tremendous amount, and you could maybe make an argument that the vast majority of behavioral issues that like substance stuff starts initially with trauma, and the trauma may not be significant.
Right.
And then there's the bigger traumas like what May went through and so forth. And there's a lot of people that believe, that are deep into recovery that think that they're 100% of it's trauma. And again, I don't believe that it's 100% of anything.
Just thinking of
yeah, I agree with
in
that.
my family. I mean, I think that, and what we believed as doctors for a long time is the brain and mental health. And now, we know mental health is actually, there's so much more, there's so much hormones and neurochemicals in the gut that play a part in neurotransmitters and brain health, etc. But we used to say the brain is like another organ. Sometimes your pancreas doesn't make as much insulin, and sometimes your thyroid just doesn't make as much hormone anymore, and we have to adjunct that with supplements. And for some reason, people's brain neurotransmitters don't function as well as they should for somebody's sort of baseline. And maybe for a while you were fine, and then something happens and your brain decides it doesn't want to make the right amounts of serotonin or norepinephrine or whatever. And so therefore, let's give it some drugs to like replace that, right? That was the
yeah.
So I would say that I do believe, mental health issues can be, for sure, we all know it can be hereditary. I think a lot of cases, even in my family, there's bipolar disease, and how it unmasked. I would think with my sister, but I could be wrong. She would say that there was no real specific trauma that she could pinpoint. There might have been, but so if there's a, for a lot of people, it's like, no, I don't think there was one really dramatic thing that happened. I'm just having panic attacks. Things have been great in my life or whatever. I think it can be multiple little small insults that add up. nature and nurture and all that, just like anything else. So
Right.
my point is that, yeah, sometimes you can definitely blame it on certain traumas or things that happen as you're developing as a kid and your brain's developing. I mean, we know your brain's developing until your mid-20s for sure, but
Right.
maybe it's a subconscious insult that you don't really notice, but maybe not.
Yeah, but I think that where we get into trouble, for sure we have seen this in ways in the last year with COVID and just with the political discourse and whatnot, is and it's a real problem. I think there's this deep-seated kind of human bend to tribalism, and so we try to make everything binary, right? Everything's binary. It's like the COVID vaccine is great, therefore everyone should have it. Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, we don't give meningitis vaccine to everybody, but we do give it to young people going into a dormitory and in university settings, because that makes sense. The cost benefit ratio at that point, the risk benefit ratio makes sense. We have great chemotherapeutics if you get testicular cancer, but May's never going to need that treatment because she don't have the testicles. So the two things can be seemingly contradictory, but at the same time can be true.
Right.
And so if trauma is the source of where your addiction came from or where your anxiety disorder came from, then it stands to reason that the treatment of that should go back to that trauma and for lack of a better term, unpack that and deal with that. And that may be primarily talk therapy. It may be some medication. It may be a combination of that. It may be a combination of that with exercise. It may be a combination of that with exercise and a different diet and altering your gut microbiome. Like, there's lots of complex things that interplay with this. But what we've been sold in modern medicine is a very binary position. Oh yeah, your brain is broken. We don't really give a crap about why your brain is broken.
Right. Yeah, here's the medicine.
So here's the medicine,
or ACT or a lobotomy
and,
or whatever.
And who's happy? Who's happy? Well, I'm happy as a doctor because I've seen you in 10 minutes instead of 2 hours. So I get to see another patient and bill somebody else. The system I work for is super happy because the more productive I am, the more money they make. And the pharmaceutical company is absolutely laying down and peeing straight up in the air. They're so happy because we're pumping people filled with tons of pills.
Yeah.
And so, but not realizing that there's some people with medications that will save their life with mental health. There's absolutely no question of that. At the same time, there's lots of people we've made way worse with pills because that wasn't what they needed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is, I guess the fun part about having a podcast is kind of like having a blog or something. You're like, oh, you look, I've only had it for 3 years, but it's like, you see how your opinion changes, and the spiritual word for this would be like humility, right? Which that's not really a word that the world would use, maybe teachability or something like that, right? So it's hard to be, the thing that's hard is, like, you guys know, like, I have the patient perspective, not being a doctor. And I really respect my current psychiatrist, but really at the end of the day, he's not really going to ever recommend psychedelics or like other, you know what I mean? He's not going to be like, hey, you're doing really great. You haven't been in the hospital for 2 years. Hey, let's try something new, right? He's just probably not going to do that. So the person that has the hardest time is the patient. If kind of what you're saying, like if it's not meds, or in this, my journey of like, oh, I was over medicated and yeah, I was resilient and I was a fighter and I did the best I could to like stay alive. That ended up, whatever. Then I got off the meds on my own and that was my own bad decision, but a lot of people now, I think now that these medications have been around for a long time, like, what's the effect of people who've been on stuff for like 20 or 30, 40 years? That's more conversation we can have. I know there's like Latuda's new, or you know what I mean? There's like new stuff, but it's a really tricky conversation because I'm like, if I saw someone was struggling, I wouldn't just go I would be like, hey man, if you can figure out how to do this without pills, I mean,
Right.
like
No,
let's try to figure that out. You know,
and
like what's
oh,
that conversation like?
we know a really actually we'll send you a link after, but a really renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Peter Bregan. Is he in his 80s now?
Yeah, he's like in his late 80s.
Who now would say that most all medications, you're right, totally mess up people's brains, and we've been over medicating, and almost no one should be on them. Now, you're right. There's a time when you need to, have a rescue medicine and
Well,
do
if you're suicidal, that's a tricky
right.
right.
But you
Yeah,
would say that
yeah.
in general, probably most everybody, it just it alters your brain and not for the good, and that we're all broken, and that it sucks to have something that's broken, but it's better to be slightly broken than to be more broken on some of these medications. And
Right.
what happens?
But, again, and the guy is amazing. Like, he's an absolute saint. And, but, at the same time, we have had this conversation with him and, May and I after, like, well, yeah, I think that, I think in general, we've way over medicated people with psychotropic medications. I don't think there's any question of that. But at the same time, we've taken people that are severely, severely mentally ill. And, when it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was in the early, the mid 70s, we just locked these people up and we medicated the living crap out of them. And we gave them ECT and we did horrific things like lobotomies to them. Absolutely terrible. Okay. But they weren't homeless. They weren't living in a tent. They weren't shooting heroin in them, and they weren't running naked through the streets. Okay.
Right.
So then we had all this patients' rights stuff, which makes sense because, the horrific nature of institutionalization of the mentally ill was so bad. Then it's typically American. The pendulum doesn't swing like 20 degrees. It swings like 180 degrees the other direction. So it's to the point where we would see people who were so unbelievably ill, but yet because they weren't overtly homicidal or suicidal, you can't do anything against their will. When, some Depo Haldol would have mellowed out the hallucinations to a point where these people would be at least somewhat functional. So you sit there and you go, it's not the least bit compassionate to lock people up just because they're crazy, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, it's not compassionate to let somebody, walk 20 miles outside every day because they have this wandering delusion, because they're scared to death to go home because they think the government is shooting them in the genitals every time they get in their bed. Like, neither of those are compassionate. And, there has to be some kind of balance in there.
Yeah.
And, medication is part of it, and hopefully it gets better. And, you mentioned psychedelics, which to me, I think is really super interesting. I think that
I don't know a lot about it. I have some friends who are not pushing it on me, but just
but
talking
again,
about it. I'm like, I'm down with talking about it. I don't know if I'm gonna go to Palm Springs and do it next week, but
But the thing that's the most interesting, if you look at the psychedelic research, which is super fascinating because it dovetails well into this discussion,
right?
Which is it works where it works the best is in PTSD. So that is a trauma-based event. Okay, you were traumatized, whether it's war, whether it's sexual abuse, whatever. Okay,
right.
So you have a trauma-based event that causes a chronic anxiety disorder and this reliving of the trauma. All right. And you do the MDMA works the best out of what's been studied, works better than psilocybin, et cetera. But it only really works, and it only works really, really well, is if you combine the MDMA therapy with a highly skilled, trained therapist. So it's kind of like the MDMA allows some of the switches to be flicked,
Right.
But until you crawl into someone's head and help them, dismantle the bomb that became this bomb of PTSD, it doesn't really work. And so it's really fascinating. And you're using a medication in a way that medication should be used for 2 or 3 months while you unplug all the wires from the bomb,
Right.
and then they never need pills anymore. Okay. It's like antibiotics. You treat the pneumonia's gone. You don't keep taking antibiotics.
Right.
But the drug company loses hundreds of billions of dollars because you're not taking pills of it.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, do a whole episode on psychedelics and
Would we be on the psychedelics actually while doing the episode?
Gosh.
yeah, let's do an ayahuasca trip together.
Sounds like a Rogan-esque
Yeah, it's a
episode
Rogan-esque.
coming up.
Sounds
now.
like somebody's out there with a Ustream account has probably already done that. They're like, here's my Airstream, and we're tripping out together. No, well, yeah, I mean, it's just, I think part of the reason why it's hard to avoid medications is because, I mean, even in the times that I've gone, I mean, the last time I was in the hospital, both places, they sent me home. I mean, I was there 10 days and I was suicidal. I wasn't sleeping. I had taken Wellbutrin, which was a medicine that worked for me when I came out of my coma. But then I got off of it, and then I was trying to get back on it because I thought it would like help me get out of my depression. And it ended up spinning me into like a 3-month episode. So I was at this hospital and I had like a night where I got better. It was like I thought it was a God thing. Like I slept, I was fine. All my chaos just disappeared. So I thought it was like the spiritual experience or something. Then anyway, then it went away. Then I went right back into the chaos. And then the doctor was just like, yeah, you've been here for 10 days and you need to go home. Like you can't stay here. And I told him I was suicidal. And luckily that was the last time I was at that hospital. Then I went to another place 2 weeks later, same exact experience. And I'm just like, I have support, right? I have a psychiatrist. I had my roommates that were helping me at the time. I had my church. I had my mom. But the average person doesn't have any of that. They just go in, they're homeless. It's like almost like, I'm not trying to like just be negative on the system because I know that it's a hard job, but there's nothing that they do for people other than, try some meds and then like send you home. And it's like, whoa, the work and the hard stuff is all of the stuff that doesn't really have to do with medication. You know what I mean? It's like
You're
a
right.
therapy.
And as primary care docs,
Yeah.
it's so hard and frustrating when we see that too. I mean, I remember so many times I would send people to the hospital and you hope that in the ER they would get somebody from the local mental health to come down and do the assessment. And if that happened, it would be a 30% not even chance that they'd even just get admitted to the hospital or to the local psychiatric hospital for admission and management. I mean, and usually
You usually have to be suicidal, right?
Yeah, often it was like, no, they just send them home.
Yeah, I don't
make an
it's
appointment.
like,
it would for weeks later.
Because you guys don't prescribe.
Really suicidal.
Yeah, I know. It would be so
Well, right. That was my experience. I was like, I have to, if I really want to go, you got to hold on to the suicidal narrative. I mean, even if it's like passive thoughts, like, oh, well, you have a plan? Do you have a plan? It's like, because we're full, so you better be like seriously hurting. But then you're only there for like a week. So if you get it.
But the thing that's fascinating about this is like, this is where if we had a model where it wasn't just institutionalizing people forever and lobotomizing them like, cuckoo's nest, but where you actually had like mental health rehab facilities, right? So you might have inpatient
long-term care kind of place.
Right?
Yeah.
And so somebody goes into, and you might have people, just like we have people with terrible MS that are bedridden, that are in nursing homes from the time they're in their 30s, which is super unfortunate, but they are cared for and they are fed and you can give them medications. What if we had more of a model like that in mental health? Like, because you're right, they're homeless. It's like, well, they can't stay in the ER because they're not dangerous enough. They have no place to go. They have no support. Well, if you're that desperate and you are that, suffering that greatly, and you can go to the tent city and score some meth or heroin, why wouldn't you do that? Like, that seems entirely reasonable if you're that ill. And so, it's such a big piece of what is blighting our cities now, which is, okay, let's think about institutions differently, not like institutions, but like rehab. Like we send, if you're 80 years old and you get a hip replacement, you go to a rehab facility for 2 weeks. So if you have, mental illness and you're in the hospital for a week and now you're not acutely suicidal, then and it's just,
Well, people go into hospice and graduate from hospice. Sometimes, a year later,
you
you're like,
didn't
"Oh,
die.
you didn't die."
Congratulations. You
Well,
got
Yeah, yeah.
boom.
But there's
mean-
not a lot of long-term places
No.
though, or
There's-
if it is, it's for drugs. So
Correct.
and there's a tremendous amount of money in rehab. That's a whole other story. We might do an episode on that, big rehab.
But I think
yeah, oh
they
yeah,
put into dementia care. I mean, now these are, with people dementia care, and they're in there with no hope of getting out. But look at all the time and effort, and it's just like almost like we don't even give it a second thought. When grandma or grandpa is like their brains failed, they can't care for themselves. Now their spouse can't or their kids can't. So it's like, okay, into the memory care facility they go because they need help. And so,
Yeah, well, right.
well,
And like in
mental health-
LA, they're building
They-
homeless people apartments for an average of like 550 grand per person. And you sit there and you go, okay, hang on. Whoa, time out there, sports shoe. There's only 3 reasons why somebody is homeless. Okay. They have a mental illness, which does not allow them to assimilate into society. They're in a tough luck situation because they're between jobs and they were
Yeah.
abandoned by a spouse or something like that. And those people generally do not stay homeless for
No.
very long because they can use the system to their advantage and get out of their plight. We've known lots of people like that.
Okay.
Or they're drug addicts, or they're people that actually want to be, and I know some people that have associates like this. They're urban camping. They just never fit into society. There's 3 to 4% of your society that will never
Yeah.
assimilate into anything. Okay. So how does buying them a house help? It doesn't solve any of those core issues, whether it be mental illness, drug addiction, you lost your job, or you just have decided that you're kind of, on the Gaussian curve, the 1% that doesn't want to, assimilate.
Going to be a lifetime
Giving
hobo.
someone a house does not solve that.
yeah, right. You're just gonna use the house to like keep doing drugs or just stay like, oh, I have a place to sleep, and then some people like the streets too. So
Right. It doesn't get to the root of the problem. Right.
yeah. Wow,
Yep.
guys. Well, we just covered a lot of stuff.
I was gonna jump in, and this is
Yeah.
another could be a big topic, but the
Yeah.
other important thing I think is, which is what we're doing now, and your podcast is doing, is people. I mean, just being able to talk about it, like getting to the root of throwing pills at it. I think cognitive therapy, from my own experience, but even groups that we've done and home groups we've done through church and with friends, and just psychotherapy that patients have done. I mean, cognitive therapy and talking to other people, whether on a highly skilled level like that versus having friends, is so important. It's just to sharing how people are feeling in today's day and age, and how society is, where you don't have to talk to anybody to survive. You don't have to even leave your house to work. You as a teenager can text and don't have to talk to anybody. I remember our kids for a while be like, I can't talk on the phone. I don't talk on phones to people. I don't know. People are losing touch with each other and what's normal.
Right.
And kids don't grow up like going out and sharing their feelings or how scared they are to go on a date or ask somebody out to a dance. I mean, you don't have to. And so even losing those basic skills and knowing how to interact with others, we're even losing the ability to share how we're feeling with people and say, yeah, we're all messed up. We all have these feelings. This is how I cope. This is what helps me. Maybe this would help you. And feeling like you're not alone. And I think that's what we're seeing happening in society is, I mean, the suicide rate, we were talking about this, is not really changing in this country at all since the 50s. But
suicide rate since
but what's
1950 is
happening
unchanged, believe
with
it or
the
not.
big massacres and what's going on, and people
Really?
hating
Really?
and hating on other people is like people don't they feel alone, they feel different, they feel isolated, they feel like they're unique, then no one's like them that has these thoughts going through their head, and I think
And
it's really gonna. I don't know.
I
It's
just want people to share those feelings with intimates, like with actual other people in the same room, and not on Facebook. That's just all I ask.
yeah, but
Yeah,
that's
I love what you're saying. Yeah, we've lost a lot of the.
Because that stuff
from
has
the
to be a give and
computer,
take, and
from the computer to the cell phone. We've really lost
it has to be human interaction. Because it's like, give me a shout out if somebody lost someone from cancer, or give me a shout out if it's whatever awareness week, and it just, I mean, I'm this, cynicism, well, sarcasm is my love language, and so it it really, like, there's a point, like, no, you need human interaction,
Human connection is powerful.
and you might need professional human interaction, but it needs to be a human interaction.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the faith part of this, which I know is, like I said before we started recording, I'm like, it's kind of ambitious to tackle both subjects, but um, I do that because those are the two things I understand the most, right? Is being a person of church, which comes with lots of, we could do a whole series on church
Right,
and
right.
right, and a lot of times the thing that trips people up is church, but the idea is what I see all over scripture is like the idea of community. Like that's it. I mean, Jesus is spending all of his time like talking to people in the open, right? He's exposed, he's around every kind of person that he could be around, right? And then all of the New Testament after is pretty much just all about community, right? It's like that's it. Not I'm not saying it's that simple.
It's community, and it's also believing in something bigger than yourself. I mean, if we're just all evolutionary gnats,
Right.
ants, or animals,
Yeah, that's pretty hopeless.
here, and we're here, we're born, and we live and we die, and there's no bigger purpose to us being
Right.
living being things, then right, why not
Right.
do all this
No,
crap to other people? What does it matter?
Right.
If
Right.
there's no basis for being, there's no morality, there's no anything.
If that's what you truly believe, that you are a cosmic accident that's here for 70 or 80 or 90 years, and then you're
Right.
gone.
I don't know if people really think that. Well, maybe they.
But if you
Yeah,
really
yeah.
do, then actually we
Yeah.
have way too few mass shootings, because we should have
Right.
way more.
But I think you're right. I think people out there in the heart of hearts don't. But it's easier to live your life by denying it, because you don't have to abide by anybody else's
Yeah, and I think
rules or moral compass other than
I
your
think
own.
I think you're right. The reason that it's not the purge out there every day is
Right.
because people deep down really believe there's more. There's more than themselves.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's like love is kind of the most important thing, and that message gets expressed outside of faith, right? I mean, everybody wants, we get tripped up, I think, on wanting justice more than kind of anything else, right? That's what we've kind of seen happen in the world, but it's like, yeah, if you experience God's love for real, you are able to give that to other people, and that's where you have connections with others. And maybe the reason why you don't open up to people, you could say it's like, well, we all got trust issues. Like, why am I going to go just start telling my bipolar story to a bunch of people? And like, I don't know, how's that going to go? You know what I mean? I could get rejected. All the reasons why we kind of like disconnect from each other, right? But it's like, man, to be alive and to, I'm not married, I don't have kids, but like to have a family someday, to be alive for my nephews, to have real friendships with people, even though I struggle, like that's what makes it like worth it. Like if not, then it's like, well, then I'm not doing a podcast because this is all about talking to people, So yeah. So
No, this has just been, this has been really great. I love what you're doing. Like, I think the combination of taking what you know most, which is your faith, and the mental illness part is brilliant, actually. And I loved what you just said about, people are forgetting love and going kind of straight to justice. Well, justice is important, but justice isn't my job. Like,
yeah, it's complicated because it's like we can't avenge. I mean, look at these like shootings. Like, look at all the pain. It's like usually the shooters kill themselves, so then it's like you're left with all this pain. But then if like the guy lives, we want him to be like locked away forever, but it doesn't take away the the loss. I mean, it might help a little bit, but I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to. I don't have that experience, but
Yeah, there's a really good book on that specifically. It's called I think it's called Called to Forgive.
yeah.
The Charlotte what was it? Not Charlottesville. What was the
Of the Columbine.
no, South Carolina.
Oh.
The shooting where the guy actually was a white supremacist racist who went into the this black church during Bible study,
Right.
said he wanted to be part of Bible study, and then he looked at everybody and he sat there and he said, "I'm killing you all because you're black." And
Wow.
the one woman who was killed was a pastor. Her husband was also a pastor. He goes to the scene of the crime because he actually worked as a policeman in his previous career. He knows all these guys, and it was Charleston. That's right, Charleston, South Carolina. He knows a lot of the cops, and they're like, "You can't go in there." Long story short, his wife is killed. His wife is killed in an absolutely 100% racially motivated killing. There was no question about it. There was no ambiguity. And he goes to the bail arraignment for this guy, and he stands up and says, "I forgive you because Jesus told me to, and you should accept his forgiveness so you don't go to hell." And he wrote a whole book about this, and it was fascinating because he goes, I don't want Dylan Roof, the killer, is God's problem now. He's not my problem. I never think about him because I don't have to, because he's not my problem. Now, whatever the justice system does with them is fine with me.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating story. But here's the thing that's the most interesting. He stands up in public a few days after this happens at this arraignment. It's a bail hearing. You know what happened in Charleston? There wasn't a single riot. There wasn't a single place burned. There wasn't a single store looted. They had a massive peace march with all these churches 4 or 5 days later, and it was all peaceful. And it was all because one man chose to suck it up and preach forgiveness and not vengeance.
Yeah, interesting.
And you think of these other, terrible atrocities that happen, and it when it's vengeance, your city burns down. When it's forgiveness, you get a peace rally. It was absolutely amazing. They had nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing
Wow.
bad. It didn't make the news because it wasn't they weren't burning the place down.
Yeah. Let's go on the news and talk about people being at peace because of forgiveness. Like,
Yeah,
It's not a story.
It doesn't sell.
No.
yeah, I just looked up. I just Googled the book Called to Forgive. Anthony Thompson.
Yes, that's the guy.
Wow, guys. Wow. Okay, so we just talked for like an hour, so I don't want to take up your your whole night, but this is so fun. So let me, and we can totally do part 2 sometime too. I'd love that. Let me try to kind of conclude. We just talked about a lot of great stuff. So, what advice would you guys give to people who are like, that you have experience with this as being there as doctors, but what would you say to people who maybe are struggling right now? Like, they feel overwhelmed. It could be suicidal thoughts. It could just be the world just, feeling overwhelmed. And like, what advice would you give to that person that's really hurt?
I would say, no, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Know that, look to your right and look to your left, and those people around you have gone through the same thing, and that there's people that out there who love you and care for you, that want to help you, and there is help available, and that you are worthy just as much as anyone else.
When I've been in the pit, I think Winston Churchill called it the black dog when he would go through bouts.
Yeah.
The black dog is back, which is the thing that actually helped the most. There's 2 things. I always had the prayer of, this is so horrible, I don't want it wasted. So God, whatever you got to teach me through this, teach me, because The least number of times I have to do this, the better. And the second thing, when things would get really, really rough, was I always knew it would get better. Now, it didn't mean that it couldn't have gotten worse, because it definitely could. But I think for a lot, especially in depression and anxiety, you kind of get convinced that it never gets better. The fear is, what if I feel like this for the rest of my life? Well, in reality, virtually 100% of the time, you don't feel like that for the rest of your life.
Right.
And for a lot of people, right at the edge of what, they think they're at their wit's end. I think that's really powerful. And then, of course, you gotta explore places where you gotta talk to somebody.
Yeah.
That's really, really, I can't not stress that enough.
Really good. Well, thank you guys so much. So what's the best way? I'll put all of your information in the show notes for this. But what's the best way for people to get a hold of you guys?
Best way is on our website. We have our contact email. So our website is bsfreemd.com.
Okay.
And they can email us at doc at bsfreemd.com.
Awesome.
And we're also on Facebook and Instagram.
Because I'm obviously an Instagram model.
Putting out some content. So we have people that message us on Instagram quite a bit, and Facebook as well through Messenger. So they can email us via our website or on those two social platforms.
Cool.
And new podcast every Thursday, BS Free MD, and that's on all the major podcast platforms.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys, and I'll be in touch, and have a great rest of your
Nice meeting
day.
you.
I've really had a good time doing this with you. It was really fun. So
Super
Cool.
fun meeting you.
okay. All right. Next time I'm in Oregon.
All right.
Yeah, let us know.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good night.
All right, guys, kind of mixing things up with the conclusion of the show. Please just refer to the show notes. And I think I'm just going to kind of skip saying what's in the notes. I think by this point, you know that I mentioned Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the link to that. And I also mentioned a couple of different other support groups that are great resources. And then all of the notes for my special guest, that is also in the notes. You can check out their website, and I encourage you to do that. And special thanks again to Doctors Tim and May. I really appreciated having you on the podcast. I hope we can do it again sometime in the future. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Louder Now podcast.